So I want to have a discussion about Impact Wrestling, otherwise known as Total Nonstop Action, or at least the former TNA Wrestling. And I want to talk about what they could do to kind of reestablish themselves as the secondary brand in the business. And it's not going to be easy. WWE is always going to be the number one company. WWE is like UFC is to MMA, NFL, NBA, and MLB are to their respective sports. They have too much of a market share, and Impact Wrestling does not have the resources, nor the history, nor the, in some ways, the talent. And I don't mean the talent on screen. I mean more so the business acumen that WWE has behind the scenes. You know, the marketing geniuses or whatever you want to call them, to really ever become the number one company. But that's okay, because wrestling has room for an alternative. And right now, if you really look at the landscape of the business, the number two company in the world is New Japan Pro Wrestling. Without question, New Japan Pro Wrestling is offering an alternative product to the WWE that's very different. It's marketed differently. There are some similarities, of course, but it's a very different kind of wrestling, and that's why it's been so successful. And that's what I really want to hammer home here with this video. Now, the thing about Impact Wrestling, TNA, is that the problem with TNA is that throughout the years, they've kind of, in many ways, lost a big chunk of their audience. Now, some of this has to do with the constant changing of networks. Some of it has to do with the very bad management, because I've said many times throughout the years that Dixie Carter just does not know how to run a wrestling company, and now it's not even in her hands anymore. And it's one of those things where Impact has angered and irritated wrestling fans, and the problem now is that even if TNA Impact were to offer a really good weekly product, it's going to take a very long time for wrestling fans to get reinvested into Impact. And one of the big reasons as to why that is, and I want y'all to really think about this, is because of the rise of NXT. Triple H, Paul Levesque, has done an amazing job of, in many ways, turning NXT into the secondary wrestling company in the United States. I think New Japan's still bigger, but in the US, NXT, even though it's owned by WWE, it's still kind of its own developmental brand. That's kind of the alternative, because I talk to a lot of wrestling fans who they tell me point blank, they say, I can't watch Raw, I can't watch SmackDown, I don't like what they do there, but NXT gives me what I want. And that's really the whole thing. The problem with TNA, with Impact Wrestling, is it's been around for way too long, and a lot of fans have given up on the company no matter what they do. It's one of those things where no matter what they do, people are just not coming back. It's a tainted brand. And that's one of the big reasons as to why Anthem decided to go with Impact Wrestling and not just go with TNA Impact Wrestling. They went 100% on board with just calling the company Impact Wrestling because they wanted to kind of rebrand it. They brought back the six-sided ring, and they brought in some former WWE people to work behind the scenes and, of course, on screen. But the big problem is when you look at the history of TNA, when you really examine the history, both when it comes to successful pay-per-views and financial gain, and when it comes to the best product, they really can't do what they used to do, at least not right away. It's going to take some time, and one of the big reasons for that is because of NXT. Now, what am I talking about? Let's go through the history of TNA. When TNA first started back in 2002, it presented an alternative product to WWE because they had wrestlers that we had never seen before appear unless you were heavily invested into the independent scene. Unless you were a huge fan of indie wrestling, you were a tape trader, you were on the internet hearing about guys like Low Key, AJ Styles, Amazing Red. There's so many of these guys. I mean, Samoa Joe. That was later he came to TNA, but he was around back then. Unless you knew about these dudes, Christopher Daniels, the Fallen Angel, you never got to see them on WWE TV. Maybe they had worked a match on like Jacked or Metal or something, a tryout match, but you never got to see them on WWE TV. WWE at that time in 2002 had a very inflated roster. You have to remember, WWE had just purchased WCW and ECW's talent the previous year, and they had a crap load of guys in OVW. They had John Cena, Batista, Brock Lesnar, Rico Constantino, Randy Orton. These are guys who are, maybe not Rico, but these guys who I just named are now main event guys. So think about that. You had all these freaking wrestlers. There was almost no room for guys like AJ Styles and Low Key and these guys. So they went to TNA. So when you first watch TNA, you're seeing this new kind of hard-hitting, smash-mouth, independent style of professional wrestling that you didn't get on WWE TV. And if you keep going throughout the years, and yeah, TNA did a lot of really stupid booking decisions, but TNA was never really about the booking. When it came to like why people bought Impact Wrestling, why people bought pay-per-views, 9 times out of 10, it was because of the matches they presented to us. Look at the biggest buy rates in the history of TNA. The biggest buy rates all involved matches with top-tier talent. And guess what, folks? Those top-tier wrestlers, the vast majority of them, 90%, are now in WWE. Think about every time that TNA was getting momentum, where the wrestling community was behind them, they were ready to support them. 2006, Samoa Joe and Kurt Angle. Kurt Angle comes over to TNA, has a great match with Samoa Joe at Genesis. Well, it wasn't that great. It was good. The rematch at Turning Point was better. They had a series of matches. I think the buy rate was like 60,000, which is huge for TNA. That is big for TNA back then. People wanted to see Samoa Joe and Kurt Angle. Now, one of the reasons why they wanted to see this is because Samoa Joe had a great reputation as being one of the great workers at the time. He was probably the best guy on the indies back then. Him and, of course, Bryan Danielson, Daniel Bryan, another guy who had a run in WWE, if many of you know that. So, also, Joe was very protected. Remember, Joe was undefeated in TNA. So they built up Samoa Joe and they brought in Kurt Angle and they had this great series that wrestling fans loved. At the same time, they also brought back Vince Russo. And what happened was when Vince Russo came to TNA, he kind of injected that New York style of wrestling. You know, that Vince Russo style of wrestling. Most of you guys who have been longtime fans know what I'm talking about, Crash TV. And the thing is, even though Crash TV certainly worked in the Attitude Era, that wasn't what TNA was really about. It was about providing talent and wrestlers that we had never seen that could do things that WWE guys just could not do. You know, and again, look at the time that these guys were so big. And look at the time when TNA was really on fire. Fast forward to 2008, Samoa Joe versus Kurt Angle in the cage. The best build-up to any pay-per-view ever. Lockdown, tremendous buy rate. Joe got the belt finally. He got the championship. They put him on top. And it was kind of downhill from there because they really didn't know how to follow that up. He had a decent run, I would say. But 2008 was the best year for TNA financially. 2008 and 2009 were the 2 years where TNA did the best financially. That you can look that up if you don't believe me. And then if you fast forward even more, what was the next big time when everybody was crazy about TNA? 2009, you had AJ Styles back on top. Samoa Joe and Chris Daniels had their rematch. They brought in Desmond Wolfe, otherwise known as Nigel McGuinness, and he had this great match, this great feud with Kurt Angle. Again, all these guys, Samoa Joe, AJ Styles, Kurt Angle. Fast forward to 2012. What was the hot thing in 2012? Bobby Roode, Austin Aries, James Storm. All these guys, with the exception of Chris Daniels and James Storm, James Storm, are in WWE now. Every single one of them. And that's the trip. That's what's a mindfuck to me. Fast forward again, 2013, you had the Bully Ray heel run, right? That was great stuff. The Aces and Aces stuff with Bully Ray, I thought was some of the best stuff TNA had ever put on. A lot of fans stopped watching, but I kept watching and I enjoyed it for the most part. I really liked it. Then you had AJ as a company hero. AJ is now in WWE. So WWE has taken every single one of TNA's, I guess, cornerstones and made them into superstars. You know, Samoa Joe, Kurt Angle's in the Hall of Fame, now he's retired, but still he's there. You know what I mean? And TNA just can't do what they used to do anymore unless they really start to cultivate talent, which is where I'm kind of going with this whole, I'm just building it up to kind of give you my idea here. For a long time, okay, WWE was very condescending towards the independents. You can go and listen to the new episode of Lucha Brothers. I'm going to leave a link down below for you guys to download that. The new episode of K-Fabulous, me and Draven break down this change in wrestling, and we talk about how for many years, WWE, Stephanie McMahon, the whole company was very condescending towards the independents. CM Punk, Bryan Danielson, Samoa Joe, they saw these guys as midget guys who couldn't draw money. It was just very condescending, and this has all been documented. Then what happened was, as time went by, Triple H, Paul Levesque, when he was building NXT, he realized that these dudes actually have talent. Seth Rollins, Austin Aries, we have Pac, who is Neville now. All these dudes have a lot of talent. Samoa Joe, AJ, they're really, really good. And he's like, you know what? Like, they're really good. Let's bring them in. So when they did that, the last kind of hope for TNA, which is having these wrestlers that WWE didn't have, was gone. It was gone. So when you look at TNA's roster, at Impact Wrestling's roster now, you've pretty much got a lot of WWE guys who aren't there anymore. You have Alberto Del Rio, who I like Alberto Del Rio. You have Bobby Lashley. You have a few guys here and there, Hornswoggle. And then you've got a handful of guys who are really good, who are really unique, but I don't think they have enough. I think what TNA, what Impact Wrestling, I keep calling it TNA, I'm used to calling it that. I think what Impact Wrestling needs to do is I think they need to really recruit guys before WWE does. And Anthem, I don't know how much money Anthem has. I don't know how much faith they have in this product, but they're going to have to really bring in guys and kind of change the entire landscape of the company. WWE is WWE and always will be. What Impact needs to do is be the exact opposite of WWE. We can't have the same production values or the same money, but we can showcase talent that WWE doesn't have. Go out there and get yourself Will Ospreay and Zack Sabre Jr. and some, go to Mexico, go to Japan, recruit some guys, make deals. The problem is that because of crappy management with Dixie Carter, Japan and Mexico don't even want to touch TNA. At least some of the companies don't. New Japan has had an issue with TNA since they booked Okada to be a jabroni and Samoa Joe's lackey years ago. You can look that up again if you don't believe me. It's been covered in the Wrestling Observer. So you can't even recruit the right guys. So you're going to have to go deep, deep, deep into the independents or deep into other countries and bring in guys that WWE does not have. But they're going to face a major problem, and that is once Triple H and WWE, once they see these guys and they're good, they're probably going to try to recruit them. And the problem is that every wrestler who gets into the business wants to work for WWE because that's where you make the most money and, where you get the most spotlight. I mean, everybody knows that. So TNA's kind of screwed in many ways. They're going to have to really, I think, promote their company totally different. They can't have a company that's like a WWE light where you have the show open up with a guy coming out cutting a promo and, then, tonight, with the heel general manager. They can't do that because that stuff's completely played out, antiquated, and WWE-ish. That needs to stop. I think TNA should book their company like New Japan, more focused on sport, refer to wrestling as a sport, as a sporting event, bring in guys who are the future, use them as much as you can before WWE takes them away from you, and just kind of, in a weird way, they're sort of becoming like a feeding ground for WWE, but that's kind of what they've been because they got Samoa Joe, AJ Styles, all these guys before WWE did, and of course those guys had huge reputations in Japan and in the indies as well, don't get me wrong, but still, like, they used them for a while, and now they're all in WWE. WWE has all of their big-time guys. The only one who WWE does not have is James Storm. And Chris Daniels is in Ring of Honor, so, I mean, there's a few guys here and there sprinkled around, but all the guys who really drew the money, like AJ, Joe, and Angle, are in WWE now, so you got to find new guys, promote the company differently, make it a real alternative and say this is a different style of wrestling, and really go back to the 2002 roots of the company, which was unique gimmick matches like Ultimate X that we had never seen before, and I mean good ones, focused on more of a sport than, sports entertainment or whatever you want to call it, and really showcase people who you cannot see on WWE TV. And don't be a small dick like, oh, you're not going to see this on WWE. Don't say that, because I hate when other companies bash, like, competitors. That's such an Attitude Era thing that doesn't really work anymore, like in the modern era. Back then it worked because you had two big companies. TNA was never big enough to compete with WWE. But, like, make the fans, re-educate the fans into knowing that, we've got talent that you can't get on WWE television that will do things that WWE guys just cannot do. Hopefully in a safe way, of course. And that's really it. And they're going to have to really, get their production going very nicely. The show does look better than it did a couple years ago when they were really, really dark. get everything to look different. Give it a different look. And you can't go too wacky. Like, Lucha Underground does like the really, really wacky stuff. WWE's kind of in the middle, with their, House of Horrors matches and crap like that. Have TNA just be like promote wrestling like it's real. Change up the style. Do things differently. That's what I would do. That's the only way I can see TNA at least bringing back some fans or making new fans that will at least watch the TV and buy the pay-per-views, because that's really the best thing that they can do. They're not going to compete with WWE, but they can at least get fans to at least give them money, at least, make some money here, because without money, TNA is not going to stay afloat. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. There's so much I can talk about this. I could talk for another half an hour about things they can do, but this is my brief kind of idea. Looking at the history of TNA, they've always been successful when they put together matches people want to see. It's all about matches that people want to see with talent that people respect. They got to find these new guys, and they got a few in there. They've already got a few in there. Keep doing it and really change the way people perceive the company. It's going to be hard, and it's probably going to be impossible, or maybe not impossible, but nearly impossible, but it can be done. It's going to take a little while. Thank you so much. Leave your comments. What do you think about this? What do you think TNA can do to make themselves unique and different? Thank you for watching this video, this wacky discussion on World of Geekdom, and we'll talk more about wrestling later on.